Thanks everyone for coming in. Looks like everybody is in person today. That's good. Remind everybody that the meeting is live streamed, and make sure your microphones are turned off and phones off. And you have travel vouchers for you to sign since you're all here. Go ahead and move on, and Katrin is going to talk about LPA update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Katrin Osterhaus. I'm the IT Audit Manager. I'm here to present an update on the KBI Automated Biometric Information System IT project, or ABIS for short. First, let me explain what this work is about. Aside from the IT security audits that we conduct, state law authorizes our office to monitor ongoing IT projects. Our objective in this work is to identify early when a project is at risk of failing due to scope, schedule, cost, or quality. We have monitored the KBI's project since January 2020, and this project will replace the state's current fingerprinting system, which is obsolete at this point. KBI has chosen to hire an independent verification and validation contractor for this $5.5 million project. This is something that the state only requires for projects exceeding 10 million, but again, KBI has chosen to do that for this one. So as a result, we have scaled down our monitoring quite a bit. We do generally look over certain project artifacts. We do participate in quarterly interviews, and we do receive and rely on the quarterly IBNV report that the independent contractor provides KBI. So your materials should include our summary memo of the most recent quarterly IBNV report. It covers the reporting period for the third calendar quarter for this year, along with some historical perspective for previous quarters as well. So if you flip to page 2, I'll highlight the most important information shown in Figure 1. As you can see, the project scope and project cost is satisfactory in the most recent quarter, and that is shown in the far right. As you can see, kind of across the figure, this has been consistent across the time. On the other hand, the project schedule is in unsatisfactory status for the most recent quarter. As you can see in the table, the project has continued to struggle in this area since inception. The project originally was supposed to be finished in January 2022, with several recast schedules since then. The new go-live date is January 25, 2024, so just a few weeks from now. Some stakeholders expressed skepticism, while others indicated this is a manageable new project deadline as of the third quarter project. Last, the project quality is in caution status in the most recent quarter. As the table shows, project quality has had some high-risk rankings in previous quarters. For the most recent quarter, you will notice a few improvements, specifically in the area of project manager, project management relationships, and technical documentation. While these items have had elevated risk, these positive changes are due to the contractor's project manager being replaced during the third quarter. This has resulted in better working relationships between the parties and improved morale across KBI stakeholders. That concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Committee, any questions? Seeing none, thank you for the update. Looks like you're still up there for the next one.
Right, again, Katrin Osterhaus, IT Audit Manager. I'm here to present the proposed IT project monitoring plan for calendar year 2024. The memo that I will speak from is in tab B of your notebooks. State law requires us to conduct IT audits as directed by this committee. This work may include monitoring ongoing IT projects to identify signs that the project is at risk of failure. Since 2016, we have monitored a number of state IT projects. The KBI Fingerprint IT project is the most current example, and as you just heard, that project is nearing completion. So to select projects for this work, committee rules require us to perform a risk assessment of state IT projects reported to the Kansas Information Technology Office. We used the 2023 third quarter report to assess the 22 approved and 35 active projects that were included in that report. Many of the projects were estimated to cost less than $1 million. Others were close to being done or already cited by Keto as in alert status. So we did not consider them to be part of what we would add value to. 2 additional projects exceeded the $10 million estimate, so they will have a separate mandatory independent validation and verification requirement, so we also did not consider those. So long story short, we are recommending to monitor the KDHE Early Childhood Data Integration and System Enhancement Project. This roughly $5 million project replaces the licensing system used by KDHE and DCF. It is at the start of the execution and will need interfaces to other state systems, which increases its risk. So that is what we're recommending to monitor going forward. And this item does require committee action to decide whether to approve our recommendation. And with that, I stand for questions.
Any questions? Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the presentation. Katrina, could you give us just an idea of some of the other projects you considered besides the KDHE project?
There are really a lot of them that were really under $1 million. A lot of them are infrastructure type projects, so replacing hardware type things. We didn't consider the risk to be really high for those. And again, the dollar value in and of itself was pretty minimal, so we did focus on anything higher than that. I will also say that we would have liked to rely on the risk assessment that is coming up in that new process, but the database is just not full and reliable enough for us to use. So we had to basically do our own risk assessment at this point. And it was kind of looking at different things, cost being one of them, interfaces with other agencies, or how important the overall project is to the state, like how many people does it reach. I'll stop there.
Thank you. I was just curious. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Williams.
Okay, thank you. Looking at the 2 options, specifically, if we were to think not about the agencies in determining, but let's just use a most recent case with the judiciary branch.
Sorry to interrupt. I think you're on the wrong memo. We're talking about the monitoring.
IT monitoring plan. This one?
Talk IT security next, but right now monitoring.
All right, my papers are in a different order. All right, I'll hold off on that.
Any further questions? Seeing none, do we need to take action on this now? Going to motion? Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will make the motion, especially since this system will be helping monitor the foster care implementation and licensing and other issues that we've seen through the state. So, Mr. Chairman, I move that we accept the proposal by post-audit.
Seconded by Senator Peterson. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. All against say no. Motion passes. Okay, moving on. For the annual IT security plan, Katrin.
Right, so I am here to present our proposed IT security plan for 2024. The memo I will speak from is in tab C of your notebooks. By law, we are required to conduct these types of audits. Last December, the committee approved a change in our current IT audit reporting. Until then, we produced detailed and confidential IT reports on about 5 to 8 agencies per year on an individual basis. These reports were confidential, and you've all heard them in executive session. For calendar year 2023, in last December's meeting, this committee approved a more limited but public IT audit on multiple agencies at the same time. We published that first audit under this new approved plan in July. And we are close to finalizing the second of such audits for this calendar year. So again, with closing out 2023, we again want to provide the committee with the same choice for 2024. So if you follow along in your memo, option A is the current style, where we conduct limited IT audits for 12 to 15 entities, resulting in a public audit. Under this option, we audit a limited number of controls within 1 to 3 security areas. Individual agency findings are batched for anonymity in the public report, although each entity still gets individual confidential findings that they are expected to remedy. Option B has us go back to conduct more comprehensive audits on about 6 entities per year, with individual confidential reports as the final deliverable. I will note that the members of the Joint Information Technology Committee discussed and favored the more comprehensive individual entity audits. So to select which entities to actual audit, we conduct a statewide risk assessment every 3 years. That's required by Committee Rule 6.2. Page 2 of the memo that you have outlines the entities that are preliminarily up for audit based on our latest risk assessment and prior audit work. So this item does require the committee to decide whether to approve or modify and approve option A or option B for a 2024 IT audit plan. For either option, we would like the committee to decide whether school districts should be included in those audits and at what ratio. And with that, I stand for questions.
Representative Williams.
Okay, yes, thank you. Okay, so of course, these are agencies, but if we were looking at what happened with the judiciary branch, if we had just done the option A, then where we just look at security awareness, training data, data center controls, asset inventory processes, would we be able to have identified any potential risks for malware that impacted so much information being out on the black?
I don't think I can answer that question.
I guess then I'll rephrase it. Are these items 1 through 3 areas of particular concern? Is there anything that would be found in option B where there are 40 to 50 important control items that are considered critical that we are now not even reviewing it?
Okay, so I think I kind of get where you're coming from. So, and good question. So the areas that we're selecting in the current version, and you've mentioned the 3 that we were auditing in July, so security awareness training, those types of things, they're all considered critical. So what we pick is kind of what I would say, minimum floor type thing. And whatever areas we pick like pretty standard basic controls within each. The larger audits where we end up auditing 10 areas, we can drill down in many, many more control items. So we'll just do more work and more detailed levels. But even the basic audit that came out in July can show you, I think, kind of where the problems are. And you can imagine that if you have problems in the low-hanging fruit areas, you will also have problems in the larger areas or bigger areas.
So I guess then coming back to that first question, you're not able to tell us if there's something apart from just the standard 3 that would have been helpful in determining whether or not they had that infrastructure or the processes in place to protect against something, ominous happening to their security.
We have done audits on the judiciary, and those audits are confidential. I'd be willing to sit down with you and walk through those confidential audits.
Yeah, I'm not asking for anything specific. I'm just asking, is there something on the list that we would add to Part A or Option A that might be helpful?
Again, I would say they're all helpful. So in the current audit that we're doing, we are auditing the data center area, we're auditing COOP, and we're auditing configuration, which has to do with passwords and those types of things. So whatever area we pick some pretty significant and important controls.
I guess I'm not going to really get an answer, so I'll just leave it with that.
I think it's difficult with confidential stuff to actually get to what the answer is there, but I think you're onto something. There might be a combination of the 2 of them that we might want to look at. Senator Tyson.
Thank you. I was looking at an option C, but maybe a hybrid between the two, but also an additional, I know the chairman was the chair of the Unemployment Council, and we were able to bring in a third party for an audit. And I think it might be good for us to do that sporadically also. So I'm looking at an option C, a hybrid type, deep dive. And luckily, we have the chair of JCIT here, so he definitely will weigh in. The JCIT committee is very concerned about going with option A. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, option A, we realize that when we do open, transparent, we love that part of it. But when you had so many agencies that failed in the basic things out of the group, and you're in a limited number of 13 agencies, that was just like putting a target list out there for people to hit, because, if you hit these 12 groups or 13 groups, you know that 6 or 7 of them have serious problems in their basic security. So JCIT was definitely in favor of the confidential and deeper dives for part of it.
Okay, so that's what your suggestion is? Option B?
Your just proposed option C once I hear about it.
So I got one more question for you. If we did option B, would we also be able to have some transparency, or is that what scares you, is the transparency? If we had a brief overview of what work, how they're doing, and then in a closed session, learn about what's going on?
I like the transparency, but the public transparency one came about. You had that sitting out there, and everybody did, so many of the agencies did so poorly, it became a target list. And that concerns me. We don't need any more judiciary issues coming up.
Yeah, so noted. Senator Thompson, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Senator Peterson brings up a good point. The more you reveal where the weaknesses are, the more somebody has an easier time identifying them and attacking them. I do like the reason I do like the larger, maybe covering less areas, as you said, if they're doing a bad job with the low-hanging fruit, most likely they're not doing the deep dive either. So, my concern would be, we need to cover as many areas as humanly possible. By limiting it to just a few, I think we're maybe not catching as many potential areas as we could, or agencies as we could. So I'd like to keep the number of audits big enough, but just hit those areas, which may end up being what this option C you're talking about. Keep the number of audits higher, the areas that you're auditing maybe a little bit less, but more comprehensive on where you think there may be some vulnerabilities. And maybe that's what the option C looks like. I don't know, but that's I like that plan.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just the last question. With the continued development of AI and it's being such a big issue, something that we've just, some of us may understand a great deal about and some of us may not, where does that fall in being able to advance our ability to monitor threats? Because AI is probably not something that has been included in past audits, or has it?
It has not. The state currently does not have, well, I take that back. There is a executive branch policy, or executive order, I should say. Jeff Maxon's in the room, he can answer that. But there is a policy that agencies have to follow, and that just came out a couple of months ago. We have not audited against it. We have not done much in that area. All the as far as using it for audit work, we in our office have said, no, it's too dangerous right now. So we certainly don't have the capability either to really use it in a more sophisticated way, I would say.
And the last question is whether or not legislative post-audit has been able to modernize at all, not in that particular area, but are there some other quickly changing areas of IT and threats that exist that perhaps the LPA hasn't, how often do you modernize your own audit process?
So the audit process itself is something that we just select as to what to do. We do use ITEC policies as our standard to go back to and say, okay, here is what the state agencies have to abide by. So we audit against that. And again, basically, it's the basic security posture that every state agency should have. And I want to say there's really no need to modernize because there's really basic things that agencies still struggle with, and so we don't feel the need to get really sophisticated. Additionally, I would say that we really cannot do things like pen testing or like some sophisticated things like that because it is very invasive, and we don't want to be the reason for breakdowns within the agency. So there are external specialists that do those types of tests, but we'll probably never do that because it's just too risky for us to do those types of things.
I know we can't really make a demand that we do something like that, but we can certainly make a suggestion to the appropriate committees to start looking at, we've got to take this a lot more seriously than we have in the past, obviously. So if we've got to figure out what we need to do to protect ourselves a little better. And it may not be through just auditing. It'll be through a much more comprehensive plan that you guys can come up with in the IT committee. Kat?
I will maybe add one thing to the pen testing since I brought it up. This is something that agencies themselves can and probably should do. So that's maybe something where you can work from that side of it rather than from an external side of it because it gets pretty expensive regardless, but it really should be something that agencies themselves should take up.
Representative Francis.
I need a little education. What's pen testing? A little better definition.
Sure. So penetration testing is when someone from the outside comes in and tries to get into your systems. There's some really hacky ways of getting in. Some are really long-term, but I think you got it.
Didn't know the acronym. I'm curious what Plan C is. I noticed it's been mentioned, but I've never heard what it is.
I think that's what we're kind of coming up with. You have a suggestion?
There's no Plan C.
No.
In
Hypothetical deal right now, which is great.
well, and just throwing off based what Senator Peterson has said about our public meeting identifying where the weaknesses are in the state. I mean, I think part of Plan C should be not having a private portion. I can see the senator that knows much more about this than I am is getting ready to step in. And then I would also think, as the Senator Thompson had mentioned, how the broad number of agencies that we can at least put our fingers on would be very important so that we identify as many agencies that need work as possible. But I would think a third part of Plan C would be trying to identify, once we do that overview, certain agencies that need a deeper dive. So maybe we can't do quite as many, but get a little more intense on some of the ones that for some reason we think we have the most risk on. Just some thoughts.
Catherine?
And just to clarify, so when we pick agencies for audit, it typically is based on risk. So we do look at how many systems do they have, how much confidential data do they hold, when have they last been audited, and what were the results of those audits. So we do try to get to kind of the riskiest agencies. I think as you can see with the advantages and disadvantages, in the current section where we go and cover a lot of agencies, the nice thing is we can actually get to some of the smaller agencies because even those hold, confidential data. And under the earlier version, we never really got there because, time was limited. So if you do a deep dive on the big fish, the big agencies that have a lot of confidential data, you'll never get to the small ones. So this year really did allow us to kind of dive deeper into some of the smaller agencies to actually demonstrate, it's not just the big agencies, it's also the smaller agencies. And one more point, if I may, to the extent that we are kind of putting it out there, I would venture to guess that anyone that is in this area already knows that state agencies have a lot of ground to cover, and their security is typically not very strong to begin with. So, you know, I don't think that our audit necessarily added, you know, more risk to those agencies that were under audit, because everybody knows that it's just hackers will attack anything and everything they can. So just for your consideration.
Representative Francis.
Yeah, my only point was, as Representative Williams had mentioned earlier, maybe we have some agencies that have, that the relatively, I don't want to minimize, but the shallower look, maybe once we do that shallower look, we look at it and we say, hey, we've got a bigger problem here than we originally thought. Maybe we need to do a deeper dive. But again, I'm not an expert in this field, just some thoughts.
Senator Peterson. And
The
then
landscape may be changing a little bit also with the Cyber Infrastructure Security Agency providing a lot of services to some of our schools and other folks on basic things like patching that we were having difficulties with. They were saying they couldn't afford to keep up on some of it. You know, now that can be provided for them if they will just reach out and ask. So hopefully some of that will be getting better.
so you're saying there's a chance. We got some progress.
There's light at the end of the tunnel. We just hope it's not a train.
God. All right, Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate the discussion, and I hear you loud and clear. There are two options before us. I would suggest maybe that we go ahead and vote. I would support option B and make that motion. And in the meantime, I would ask that the JCIT committee take a deeper dive on this and decide which way the legislature does need to go. I would recommend caution, though, however, because the JCIT has been jumping up and down for how many years now? Asking that we make IT security a priority. And I think that the legislature, it definitely has their attention now because of what's happened in the past few years. So that would be my recommendation at this point, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Seconded by Representative Williams. Katrin, do we also need to make a decision on whether or not to include the schools? Is that part of this?
So far, I think we are just at one motion. Do we, I don't know process.
All right,
Yes, if somebody could also tell me about the school decision, whether schools are in and out and at what ratio.
Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will make my motion. I move that we accept option B with schools included, K through 12 and higher ed.
And the recommendation as well.
And the recommendation, yes.
Is that okay?
And the
Second.
ratio for the schools?
The recommendation to the joint IT committee to look at it and come back to this committee on a better idea if there is one.
Oh, you want to make that part of the motion?
Didn't you say?
Absolutely, yeah. Okay.
Is that clear as mud? Senator Peterson?
Did we stay what the ratio was going to be, the same?
Yeah, the same ratio as B. I'm open to amendments if anybody wants. Okay, I'll make the
Any
motion.
discussion? Motion and seconded. Seeing notice, Representative Probst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is not for this discussion. I just want to make sure I know what we're voting on. We're making a recommendation for option B, including the recommended ratio of schools that's listed here. That's the motion on the table. Okay, thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, all in favor say aye. Aye. All against say no. Motion passes. Okay, it looks like Chris is up. proposed legislation.
This is really just a recap committee to remind you that at the October meeting, you all voted to advance a bill that we had proposed and the committee had modified. Again, this would eliminate the future recurring audits of KPERS, which is on a 3-year cycle, of 911, which is on a 5-year cycle, and it eliminates the ongoing continuous auditing of economic development, and instead, we would just take those as ad hoc requests. A copy of the bill is in the front folder of your packet. The plan is that it will be pre-filed in both chambers. And again, I was just recapping if anyone had any questions or concerns.
Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chris. Maybe it's just a suggestion in this, in that, you know, it may go a few years without auditing KPERS. Maybe for your committee, just to remind, or your staff to remind us at the beginning of the season or year or whatever, it's been so many years since you've audited KPERS. Do you want to do that? Is there a reason? So that it doesn't get missed at some point, you know, 4, 5, 6, 7 years and we don't do it. So maybe just a little simple suggestion is to put a little reminder in for the committee that for those who may not have been on the committee, we changed membership, may have interest in that. That's about all I can see. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sure, I can certainly make a note to do that. And just a reminder to the committee, anytime anyone has a concern about KPERS, please bring it up as a proposal, both yourselves and anyone in the legislature. But I will certainly make a note for that.
I can tell you that I get a lot of reminders from her. She's on top of it. Seeing no further questions. We don't need to take action on that, right? Okay. Planned legislative report meetings.
Yes, and I believe this is tab D. This is tab D in your notebook. This is a committee rule, and it requires that we as staff identify which audits we've done in the last calendar year are of particular relevance to standing legislative committees. The rule further requires that we as staff offer to meet with the chair, vice chair, and ranking minority member of each committee in the 2024 session, and that we share our proposed meeting schedule with you. So we typically present a summary of all of our audit work to House Appropriations and Senate Ways and Means early in the session, so they are not on this list. But otherwise, here is our plan, and please tell us if you can think of additional committees you think would be interested in. Like I say, we meet with the chair and vice chair, we go over the audit results, we say why we think it's relevant to whatever they're talking, we offer to come make a full presentation at their committee, that sort of thing. So for groundwater, this is going back, you gotta turn your memory back. This was, I think, last January. I'm going in chronological order. So groundwater, we proposed Senate Ag and Natural Resources, House Ag and Natural Resources, and House Committee on Water. Child support payments, whether they're effective and timely, that we propose Senate Public Health and Welfare, House Children and Seniors, House Committee on Social Services Budget, and the Joint Committee on Child Welfare System Oversight. For Election Security Part 2, Senate Fed and State Affairs, and House Elections. At-risk expenditures, Senate Ed, House Ed, and House K-12 budget. IT security controls across state agencies. This is the one we were just talking about that was released that covered multiple agencies. So House K-12 education budget and the Joint Committee on Kansas Security. The Rural Opportunity Zone Program at Department of Commerce, Senate Assessment and Tax, Senate Commerce, House Commerce, Labor and Economic Development, and House Tax. Estimating the cost of K-12 education, Senate Ed, House Ed, and House K-12 education budget. And 911, which you're going to hear this afternoon, to Senate Utilities, House Energy, Utilities, and Telecommunications, and the Special Committee on Energy and Utilities. If anyone has any additions or subtractions, I'm all ears.
And of course, if any chair ever asked for you to come to a committee to
Absolutely.
present at your,
Sure.
you do that.
These are the ones we're proactively going to reach out.
Okay. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you. Data mining. Matt, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm here just to give a brief update on our data mining, our office's data mining work. So just as a quick reminder, state law requires our office to conduct work at each state agency at least once every 3 years. One of the ways that we meet that requirement is through our data mining work. Our data mining team consists of a few of our staff who basically volunteer to do this work in addition to the normal audit duties. And that team uses a variety of different data analytics to review thousands of state P-card transactions. Those P-cards are, of course, the state-issued credit cards. And we review those to look for, transactions to look for kind of suspicious purchases that might be indicative of fraud, waste, or abuse. We do this every year. This last year, the data mining team reviewed about 150,000 transactions across roughly 75 state agencies, and that was for fiscal year 2022. This was basically any state agency that had a P-card transaction during that fiscal year. Using a variety of different automated analytics, we were able to give each one of those agencies a risk score based off of different risky transactions or characteristics of risky transactions that we've kind of loaded into this process and system. For agencies that have a high risk score, we go ahead and review the underlying data, try to understand what triggered our flags, and then we follow up with the agencies. So that's just a little bit of background as a reminder of the kind of work that we do each year. This last year, our review, it did flag a few agencies as initially risky. We went ahead and did a deeper dive and looked at the underlying data. For most of those, we didn't find really any signs of kind of obviously questionable transactions like we have seen in the past years. Different reasons for that. It's possible that some of those really specific problematic purchases or processes that we've seen in prior years could have been addressed in this last year. So we're just not seeing as much of that in our review. Going forward, we are going to continue to watch for those suspicious transactions. We will continue to risk score and do different analytics on state P-card transactions. But the data mining team is also planning on gathering and just kind of researching and brainstorming ways that maybe we could refresh some of those risk scoring processes just to make sure that we're staying ahead of any emerging fraud or abuse schemes that may be coming out. So it's just a quick update on our data mining function, what we saw this year, and kind of where we're planning on going for next year. Happy to answer any questions about our office's data mining.
Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Matt. But when and where will we see the reports, the results? I guess I'm curious on a more deeper dive as to what's going on with the data mining.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, up to this point, the committee hasn't approved data mining as a formal audit, so that isn't something that we provide a formal audit report on. This is more work that our auditors do in addition to the approved audit. So this is a way for our office to keep eyes, kind of broad coverage across all state agencies. So any state agency that had a transaction, we can risk score. What we have done in the past is if we run into an agency, we did this, I think, most recently for DCF. If we run into an agency that scored highly on our risk scoring process, we do a deeper dive in underlying data. We see things that are suspicious there, right? Then we will go ahead, and the committee approved us, I believe it was in 2021, to go ahead and do follow-up work with that agency. Again, not a formal audit, but it does give us the ability to contact DCF and try to understand what are these transactions, right? So we have 6 or 7 transactions here, or a pattern of transactions that seem suspicious to us. We'll work with the agency, and then we write up a memo for you all detailing the results of those. So if we have something to report on, like we did with DCF, or we've also looked at Osawatomie State Hospital, then we will draft up a memo. This year, we didn't see anything that rose to the level where we felt like we needed to go and do a deeper dive with the agencies.
Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know we're under a time constraint. I definitely hope the committee will take a deeper look at this. It raises more questions than it answers, your presentation by far. And as we talked before, we don't want to give specifics because we can show where holes are, but I have a feeling that I just don't have good comfort zone right now after what I've heard, Mr. Chairman. So I'm hoping we can pick this up again. Thank you.
Is there any kind of high-level report that you could get to us? Kind of who you looked at, or we looked at this agency and we didn't really find anything. We looked at this agency, we find 5 things, or is that not something that's, you don't want to do that?
I mean, this isn't an IT security issue. This is really looking at whether, so we're looking for instances of fraud or abuse within the state's P-card program. So this would be if individuals who have access to the state's credit cards, who make purchases on behalf of their agencies, what we're looking for are any trends in the state's smart data that would indicate that those state employees are misusing their credit cards to commit fraud, abuse, or doing so in a wasteful way. So those are the types of trends that we're looking for, is really purchasing patterns within the state's P-card program. So those were those about 75 agencies. Basically, if an agency had a P-card transaction, they were included in that risk scoring process to look for a variety of things that to us seem unusual. Things like purchases that were made on the weekend, or high value purchases that are an even dollar value, or certain buzzwords that trigger our flagging system as well. So just to provide a little bit of context, just to make sure that the committee, that we're on the same page in terms of what a review was, we can certainly provide a list of the agencies. It would be the 75 agencies that had a transaction in the last fiscal year.
All right, yeah, we don't need to get just piling on work to pile on work. So just to be clear, these are credit card transactions done by state employees, and you review them if a red flag pops up. And if there's an issue, you go a little deeper, and if it's an issue that you think is a big issue, you bring it to somebody.
Yeah, we follow up and then we report back to the committee.
Okay. Seeing no further questions, thank you very much. Sorry for all the confusion. Okay, Matt, you're still up.
So last thing I have for you all, I'm just going to give a brief update on our audit recommendation follow-up process. Again, as a reminder, committee rules require that we follow up with agencies about the steps they've taken to address our audit recommendations. We follow up with agencies that have outstanding recommendations that are between 6 and 2 years old, and we do that twice a year. So we just completed our second and final follow-up of the year. We have updated our website to show agencies' most recent responses to our recommendations. And then we also just went ahead and notified all legislators, the governor and the attorney general, that those updates have been made and that they are available online. Most of the agencies that we reached out to this time had either implemented or in the process of implementing our recommendation. I will note that Secretary of State's office declined a recommendation from Part 1 of our election security audit when we initially released that audit. So we did go ahead and mark them down as declined to implement on our website as well. That's my update. Be happy to stand for any questions that the committee might have.
Any questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
You turn that mic off. Okay, so Kristen, you're up. Audit proposals. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. So if you're following along with me, I'm in tab E of your notebooks. This is one that has a couple of attachments in it as well. So what we're here to discuss is a couple of audit proposals that came in this interim just before this meeting. So by committee rule, Any audit requests that are made during the interim must be considered by the committee at its next meeting, which is this one. So there are 2 audit requests. I'm going to walk you through those requests, and then I will also take you through the audit schedule, and we'll discuss what options you have. I think in my mind, you've got 3 different options or some combination thereof that you all could pursue today. So just kind of an overview. In addition to the requested proposals, like I said, there's the copy of the audit schedule. We'll talk about this in a minute, but you would likely be able to start one of those. We would likely be able to start one of those audits before the spring meeting, but not both. So you'll have some options today in terms of if you don't approve, the committee could choose to add one or both requests to the list of performance audits that you all would consider at the what's likely to be the April 2024 meeting, the spring meeting. So if you want to turn with me to attachment A, that has the first of the 2 audit proposals that are before you today. So this one is from Representative Probst, the first one, which would be evaluating hospitals' compliance with the Kansas Lay Caregiver Act. So this is a statute that requires hospitals, essentially when someone is admitted for inpatient care, hospitals are required to allow the patient to designate someone as a caregiver, so someone who would provide the sort of care for someone after they're released from the hospital. If someone designates a caregiver, then hospitals are also required to communicate certain information with them. So that would include letting the caregiver know if someone is going to be transferred to a different facility or before they're discharged, as well as sort of the treatment that they would need to provide this person. So this audit would look at one question, which is, do hospitals comply with the Kansas Lay Caregivers Act requirements for designating and communicating with caregivers? And we estimate that this would be about, take 4 staff and about 4 months of time. Do you want me to move on to the next one, or do you want to?
Any questions on that, what that audit would do? Okay, seeing none.
Okay, so the second proposal, also in attachment A, would be have us review school district, state, and local expenditures and budgets. So this audit proposal was requested by Representative Samantha Potter Partial. So in state law, there's certain, let's say, funding sources that school districts are required to spend in a particular way. So like one that would be familiar to you all of recent is at-risk funding. So there are other sources of funding, of course, that school districts receive as well. This audit would have us, there'd be 2 questions. So the first of those questions would have us look at whether or not school districts spend those funding sources in accordance with state law in the most recent school year. So a couple things that I want to highlight about this particular question. We would only be able to look at a sample of school districts and only a sample of funding sources. So we likely would exclude at-risk because that's something that we've looked at quite a bit over the last few years, and pick up some other funding sources. The one thing I would note about that is, so at-risk, something like that has some very specific requirements for how that money is used. Not all funding sources are going to have that sort of specificity. So we don't know exactly what that would look like yet. That's one of the things that we would have to kind of dig into as we got into this work, is figure out which things have clear enough criteria that there's something we could compare to. This one would also include a second question, which would have us look at school districts' budgets and whether or not they accurately report their expenditures in those budgets. So again, this would be just for a sample of school districts only. So we're estimating this one would take 4 staff and 5 months.
Any questions? Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on your sampling, how many schools would you look at approximately?
I'm not certain. I would think we're talking more like in the ballpark of, let's say, 15-ish.
Okay, and on the hospital, are you taking a sampling on it also, or are you planning on? Okay.
Yeah, we would have to look at, yes, a sample of
So-
hospitals.
Question would be, I like both these audits, and my question would be, if the sampling was a little bit smaller on both of them, would we be able to proceed forward with both of them? Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is there a certain number you need to sample to have it be accurate, or is that something you can do?
I think that, so I will say, at least if you're, with your permission, if you're okay with this, I did have conversations with Representative Probst about, at least on that particular audit, the Kansas Lake Caregiver Act. But I mean, there's always a trade-off with these things in terms of kind of how much coverage we're going to get. And I think at least the requester felt it important to be able to look at enough that there's something that we can, it's not just one hospital, or there's an option we discussed here. We could look at, let's say 5 or 6 hospitals, but then we could only look at like a really small number of patient records, which also doesn't really tell you a whole lot. So, I mean, we pursued the full audit for a reason.
Representative Probst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I might add just a little more context on that. And I also want to acknowledge Kristen did a lot of work just to get to a place where we could formulate a question to bring to an audit. So I was kind of blown away with the amount of effort and time that she put into just getting something on paper. But yeah, one of the things we looked at, I mean, this is going to be a challenging audit because we suspect that there's a mechanism to see whether this is being followed. And in some cases, it's going to require going back to patients and saying, did they follow this? Because there may or may not be a record to indicate whether it was followed. So this size sampling, I think, and the way that we were looking at going at it will give us the best amount of information, or the most reliable information to make a decision. Part of my thinking in going this way, this is constituent-led. This is from a constituent of mine who was very well informed and had a lot of documentation, and I think I sent that out to all of you about what happened in her case. Instead of isolating and saying, and being reactionary to this and saying, let's just draft legislation and into an already very heavily regulated industry, let's do an examination and see if there's a widespread problem, which is what I suspect we'll find. But if I'm wrong in that, then we adjust our approach. And maybe there's nothing to be done. Maybe it is an isolated incident, but we have to look at enough information. We have to look at it deeply enough to determine whether there is a problem. And if we find there's a problem, then we have what we need, I think, to produce something reasonable to move forward with.
Any questions on that? Nope. Question on what he just said, or?
No, I
Okay.
fully understand that.
Senator Thompson.
I had a question on the second audit, and that was, if the school districts are not spending their money as they are supposed to via state law, that objective 2 would catch what they are spending it on. Is that what your intention is? In other words, if they're diverting funds to something else, I'd like to know what else they're diverting their funds to.
I think all of that would be actually part of question 1. So question 2 would be more about how it's reported out. So let's say, for example, looking at the way that a school district categorizes its funding, and then does it make sense in the way that that's reported out in their budget? And if not, why not? What might explain what's going on?
Okay. That makes
sort of
sense.
thing.
Thanks, Kristen. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So coming back to the second item that was recommended, and it's, of course, I do agree, it's always great to audit and go further, but as I'm thinking about these big funds, and maybe Tamara, as she's thinking about them, you have your general fund, and they can use it for anything, and you have your supplemental fund, which is your local option budget, and they can use it for anything. And then your capital outlay is pretty lengthy. I mean, there's a list of things that you can use it for, so I guess you could look at that. Then you've got your transportation, that would be kind of silly for them to use it for anything other than that, so it would be unlikely. You've got your bond and interest. So I guess to your point, you've got your at-risk, which we already know they didn't use it appropriately. And then you've got special education, which we have what's in statute, but then we have a huge book of guidelines that allows, and that's supposedly audited by the Kansas Department of Education to make sure that it's done annually. So they say that they do a review of the special education, but we do find, things that are used for utilities and other things in that particular area. So anyway, I guess my only question is, will this be as impactful as maybe we wanted it to be? So I'm just literally asking the question.
So outside of the auditing team, I don't know if there's anybody in the room that knows the school finance better than you do. And so I would lean on you for that. We have an audit done in the last 2 or 3 years on each of the major things that had to be spent specifically on above and beyond education. In your opinion, we would exclude those and just look at the broad expenditures, but if they can be spent on anything that you think it would be, we might want to ask the bringer of the audit to be more specific.
We could do that, but we also, to Senator Tyson's point of actually bringing it down to just maybe 2 districts and just reviewing those 2 districts. And then you could talk to the one that brought the audit and find out if that would be okay. Maybe she'd choose one and there would be one randomly selected, because then you can get an understanding of, was it valuable? Was it meaningful? Did it tell us anything? Rather than having 4 auditors spend several, 4 or 5 months on it, maybe it's just a 100-hour audit where we just can ascertain if it's even worth pursuing at a deeper level.
Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do know that this audit was specific, just much like constituents. A constituent brought it to the representative, and it was pretty egregious. I know we say that we've got the pools of money and that it's tracking and following, but a couple years ago, we had pretty egregious examples of schools spending on travel where they weren't supposed to, or spending funds they weren't supposed to on travel. And this audit is actually coming back to that. Apparently, superintendent is using funds from, for travel for his own personal vehicle, and they're wondering if that's acceptable. Also, I know that we've had situations, school district, in my Senate district, the superintendent was literally using the credit card for personal expenditures. So I think that's why this audit has been requested, is a deeper dive of, yes, we think that everything's copacetic and everybody's following the law, but we do have instances and situations where they're not. And I would like to see that maybe this audit could help prove one of the things that I've asked for years, and I'm a major sports advocate, huge fan, used to play. We can never get the breakdown of how much money we're spending for extracurricular activities versus education in the classroom. And I'm not saying that we don't need those. I'm just saying it'd be nice to know, and maybe this audit could go that direction somehow. Just a thought. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other comments on that? So I hate to talk in hypotheticals, and I don't know how much you can divulge on why the audit was brought, but if that was really the reason the audit was brought, was for one specific incident, is that something you can look into with a 100-hour audit?
I think it's appropriate that we could go back to the requester and see if we can come up with a limited scope audit, something that we think is doable within 100 hours, if there's something that's still of interest to the requester at that point.
Representative Williams.
Before I make a motion, I want to make sure that it seems feasible. But again, coming back to whether or not she would want to particularly, turn it in April as something to be considered as a full scope audit, would it be possible to take this to 100 hours and do her priority one and then a second one that's selected at random if time allowed within that 100 hours, so that we could understand if this was beneficial to do this, if we were able to even see some of these items that might be misuse of funds or fraudulent use of funds, but not necessarily tied to anything in statute, more perhaps tied to something related to local decision-making of that body. So I guess the question before I make a motion is, would that be feasible to do 1 to 2 for a 100-hour audit in the kind of the parameters that you've laid forth for the sampling?
I do. So I think so I'm a little hesitant because I don't want to commit to, I don't know exactly without kind of digging into this a little bit more. For sure, if we could do 2 districts, but I feel confident that we could, if there's one district that's really the concern, going back to the requester to kind of frame something into a limited scope audit.
With a motion could we make a motion and then have you, Kristen, to work with the representative to kind of revise that a bit, but we give approval at this time so that it can be moved forward? Okay. Chairman, would it be possible if I go ahead and make that motion? Would you like me to hold?
Go ahead.
All right. So, Mr. Chair, I go ahead and move that we approve a limited scope audit for 1 school and 2, if time allows, in which those districts, we're looking at their spending and comparing it to state law to make sure that they are complying with state law, and that the priority school district will be the representatives of choice, and the second will be a sampling if time is allowed.
Okay, and just to be clear, that would allow us to still, if we wanted to do option A, you would still be able to do that. We could add that to the docket.
Would it be helpful for me to walk through? I know there's attachment B in the audit schedule, so I can also talk through that. We didn't quite get to that point, but I'm happy to do that if that is helpful.
Okay, the motion seconded by Senator Tyson. We can go ahead and do that and then talk about the schedule. Any discussion on the motion? Senator Corson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, I guess I would just question if we're going to do, we have 287 school districts, so we're going to do an audit of 2 out of 287. I don't know what we're going to be able to get from that that's going to reasonably be able to extrapolate that to what's going on with all of our school districts around the state. It just seems like too small of a sample to really be helpful. And then if the goal of this is really to look at one particular school district from the representative's area, that to me is really not a legislative post-audit issue. That's really a school board issue. I mean, these are issues that should be brought to the school board. I mean, if there's a thought that there is inappropriate spending or spending on things that where it shouldn't be, that to me is really a school board issue for one district. I would not really want to see the legislative post-audit committee get into the business of auditing a particular school district because a representative has an issue with their school district. To me, we should be thinking much more at much a higher level than that and let those things be handled really by individual school districts and school boards who are also elected.
Any further discussion? Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the advantage might be for this committee that we would understand if this process is helpful in understanding on whether or not school districts are following state law. We do have evidence of districts not complying with state law, especially in the area of at-risk funding. We have observed that. And so if this small sampling of 1 or 2 helped us better understand if it was trackable in some of these other areas or these other fund areas, then it would not be a waste. I would also say that we have looked specifically at community colleges of name and of course audits of all types of agencies. So it's not as if we're picking on any one particular, but I think overall, it's the ability to assess, is this even something worthy to pursue? And then the final note is that, like I said, the Kansas Department of Education does, for example, audit the free lunch program. And they audit other areas, the transportation, making sure that they use the special education for special education students within the transportation. But that's not really open for us, for you and I to peruse or to really understand how effective that is or not. So this would be a way for us on the legislative side to get this sampling of a district to see if it's a worthy process. It might not be, but we won't know if we don't do it.
Any further discussion? Seeing none. All in favor of the motion, say aye. All against, say no. Motion passes. Okay, we're going to move on. You want to run through the, rather than run through that, can you let us know, will you still be able to make this fit?
Yeah, yes. So I think with this one, if we go the route of a limited scope on the school district proposal, we do have room in our schedule to pursue Representative Probst's request about the Kansas Lake Caregiver Act as a full audit. The thing that I would note for your all's attention is it looks like we would have time in our current schedule to start that audit, but we would not finish it before the spring meeting. So effectively what that means is typically at your spring meeting, you all come together, you look at your list of topics, you choose the ones you want us to pursue, and that fills our schedule for the following year. This one would take some of the time out of the, let's say, the 2024 into 2025 schedule. But we would be able to start it without you all needing to rescind one of the audits that you already approved, which those would be, you all approved an audit of TIF districts, of TANF, and of the Kansas Housing Resources Corporation. So those are the three that you all approved last spring that we have not yet finished. I actually haven't started those three yet. So we'd start those and this one before the spring 2024 meeting.
Okay, thank you. Representative Probst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, with that, I would make a motion that we accept the audit of the Lake Caregiver Act to begin now and then carry over to the spring meeting.
Seconded by Senator Ware. Any discussion on that? Seeing none.
Just a question.
Oh, Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to make sure that we didn't need to do the limited on it, but you're confident that we need the full audit, is that correct?
Thank you. We had a lot of discussion about whether this could be limited. I don't think we would get any usable information out of a limited scope audit.
Okay, I just wanted to confirm that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye. All against, say no. Motion passes unanimously. Okay, moving on. Okay, we're going to move to the executive session, and we're going to start with the IT security follow-up in the interest of time. You have a motion. Senator. on, and we're back in session. Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to recess this open meeting for a closed meeting pursuant to KSA 75-4319A under the justification listed in KSA 75-4319B1 to discuss matters relating to the annual evolution of the post-audit because of evolution, constituent, I can't even read the typewriting, a need to discuss a personal matter, a non-elected personnel to resume the open meeting room in 546-South at, I have the wrong motion, don't I? No wonder I'm sitting here going, which one do I need? Yeah, okay, I renew my previous motion until 3:30 with Department of Labor and KUMC.
Seconded by Representative Francis. All in favor, say aye. All against, say no. Motion passes. In regular session, and Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we're going to start with the consent calendar? Is that, no? Okay, you want to go ahead with the review?
Evaluations.
Okay. Performance audits and valuations. Okay, I'm there. Again? Oh, my God.
The new one.
I move to recess this open meeting for a closed meeting pursuant to KSA 75-4319A under justification listed in KSA 75-4319B1 to discuss matters relating to annual evaluation of the post audit because such evaluation constitutes a need of discuss in a personal matter a non-elected personnel to resume the open meeting in room 546 South at 338. 345. 345.
Seconded by Representative Francis. All in favor, say aye. All against, say no. Motion passes.
Well, thank you, committee. We'll go ahead and return to business. I do want to quickly thank Chris and her audit team. I've got to tell you, they're some of the best and some of the best in the nation. And I just thank them and the revisor, Tamara. We're lucky to have this group put together. Appreciate them. Anybody else? Okay, thank you. David Brevitz is next up on the agenda.
Thank you. Good afternoon. David Brevitz with Brevitz Consulting Services, and I'm here with my colleagues to present the 2023 audit of the Kansas NG 911 system. And what I'd like to do first is just be real clear on a couple of acronyms. We'll try not to use them without defining them. NG 911 stands for Next Generation 911. And another term that you'll hear consistently is PSAP, PSAP, which stands for Public Safety Answering Point. So the 911 system development has paralleled the development of the telephone system, which, if you think back, at one time was dial-up telephone. You dialed 911 over the telephone network. Now we use the internet more than anything else. The 911 system has mirrored that, such that NG 911, Next Generation 911, is the next evolution, which allows carrying voice, data, and video and texting. So we did perform the 2018 audit. We've got some perspective. The system was not as far along then as it is now. There were some amendments to the 911 Act in 2019 based on that audit, which increased the fee and increased the minimum distribution to PSAPs and changed the composition of the council just a little bit. I'd like to introduce our team. Pat Myers is here with us today. Pat has an extensive background in telecommunications networks, and he led the deployment in Kansas of the first telecommunications relay system in 1990 pursuant to the ADA. And since that time, he served as president of the Communication Services for the Deaf and is otherwise an experienced telecommunications engineer. Also with us on WebEx is David Bahar. David is a national expert in telecommunications technology for services for the deaf and hearing impaired. He's currently director of the Telecommunications Access of Maryland Center, which is TRS for Maryland. With that, I think you probably know the audit must address 3 statutory items. 1, what is the status of the NG 911 system? 2, is the 911 fee money, that 90 cents per subscriber account per month, being spent only on statutory allowed uses? And 3, is the 911 fee funding adequate? The Coordinating Council has been operating under the Act since 2012. There was new leadership for the council in the middle of 2023, so we had a good opportunity to interact and work with that new leadership. Underneath the council, providing the administrative and financial support, is the local collection point administrator. That's a contracted function. They collect the money from the service providers, the fee money, and distribute it back out to the to the PSAPs, and also provide administrative support to the council. I think if you want to turn to Appendix B of the report, which is towards the back, that is the 2022 financial results. It shows actual and budget, and that's a good way to view the operations of the council. It lists out the different sources of income, which is from the telephone fee. It lists out the payments that the PSAPs pay for the console. They pay $18,000 a year for each console that they use. And then the main expense of the council is payments back out to the PSAPs, and then contract expenses. The income statement lists out all the various items, the most significant of which is contract payments to the provider. There's a lot going on in the 911 world, particularly the Congress is working with an estimate of the cost of deployment nationwide of $15 billion for nationwide deployment of NG 911. That money is going to be, once it's passed Congress, obviously, but that is going to come back to the states on a pro rata basis, and there will be extensive funding for further deployment in Kansas as well as other states. But what's important about that is Congress has also enacted a requirement for the FCC to look at the fees assessed by states and assess whether or not they are diverted to other uses. So if the FCC makes a finding that a state is in fact diverting 911 fees, they may not allow the grant money to come to the state. There are currently 3 states that are labeled as diverters, and that's New York, New Jersey, and the city of Las Vegas. Kansas has a sterling reputation at this point in that regard. So at this point, I would turn it over to Pat Myers to talk about the status of the system in the state of Kansas. Pat?
Thank you, David. Well, I'm happy to report that the status of the NG 911 system in Kansas is in great shape. There's a map on page 7, and it's the same map on page 46 that shows the current status. Outside of the 6 eastern counties who have elected to remain with the MARC system, the Mid-America Regional Council, all Kansas PSAPs have migrated from the legacy technology to the EZNet IP digital network, which is capable of processing voice, text, photos, video, and other data. The migration to NG 911 platform is complete. This is a major milestone started back in 2015. Improvements are always ongoing. Converting VPN circuits to AT&T switched Ethernet for flexible bandwidth, additional efficiencies, and network redundancies are underway right now. AT&T has been the prime contractor for this service since 2015. At the request of council staff, additional subcontractors had been added to gain efficiencies and to help with creating enhanced features. Some of those subcontractors are Motorola, Rapid Deploy, and another provider known as ECATS. AT&T considers Kansas a flagship state. And what I mean by that is that at the request of the council, these other vendors were brought in. AT&T has been very amenable to bringing those subcontractors in under a subcontract basis. The knowledge of the staff, of the council staff that's been administrating since 2015, and the relationship with AT&T has grown very strong. Strong to the point to where AT&T is comfortable coming to Kansas to trial new technologies. And Kansas has a reputation as being a leader in providing NG 911 services nationwide, and this has contributed greatly to that symbiotic relationship. In June of this year, AT&T and Rapid Deploy, one of those subcontractors, approached Kansas to be its first customer for a new application called the Lightning app. It's also referred to as Rapid Responder. You may see it referred to both ways. This delivers 911 call data directly to the first responders real-time, smartphones and/or tablets. It also could have application for other state agencies that have been looking into this application as well, like KDOT is one, and then the 988 with KDADS has always also been interested in it. That application is being rolled out, and it should be released this month of December. The Kansas Council staff is highly regarded in the national public safety communities and the trade associations, and it's an active participant in NENA, which is the National Emergency Number Association, the one that creates a lot of the standards that we have to adhere to, NASNA, the National Association of State 911 Administrators, and APCO, the Association of Public Safety Communications Officials. So even though 988 is not part of the NG 911 system, it was required to be implemented nationwide in July of 1922. So it's a separate network. It rides to public switch telephone network. It does not touch the NG 911 network. However, the staff monitors and provides best practices to the KDAD's agency and assistance when needed, but no funding is being provided. More details on that are on page 26. I'd like to recognize a group that doesn't get a lot of recognition, I don't think, that is really key to the success that Kansas enjoys with its current system. And that's the Geographic Information Support from KU Data Access and Support Center. It's been absolutely key to the success Kansas enjoys with its NG 911 and national reputation. Its accurate and timely location data is the backbone of the NG 911 services. So in a nutshell, the Kansas NG 911 technology deployment is advanced. We met our first goal, our statutory goal to implement the EZNet, and Kansas is well-positioned and well-funded to tackle the FCC's Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, which David Bahar, our partner, will talk to a little bit now, which will have some new requirements and new services. So now I'll turn it over to David.
This is an audio test from your interpreter. Can you hear me, room?
Yes.
Thank you, Pat.
You're welcome, Ann.
Yep. Thank you, Pat. And let me tie into what Pat said about this state of 911 in the state of Kansas. It's really going marvelously well. A lot of things are afoot right now that are influencing the work of the PSAPs in your state. Certainly, there is an open notice of proposed rulemaking, or NPRM, at play right now about 911, and the proposed rules for that, the requirements, will certainly require VoIP and wireless providers and internet-based TRS providers to make sure that 911 goes in an IP format as well. And the regulations have been put forward along those lines, making sure that NG 911 calls can be placed and land in those PSAPs. Really good thing here. We're also talking about the coordination of local agencies to work with their traditional networks and systems as well. Some technology that's now at hand and accessible for 911 users is a text variety. Of course, we've seen that TTYs go the way of all the earth, given the changes in technology, and frankly, they're outdated and out of use. So more and more citizens who struggle to use traditional phone lines will use other methods to contact 911, and the FCC has recognized that fact. And we are undertaking this transition period now. So certainly with the IP-based migration, we have identified the need for real-time text because the current networks are not accessible to these folks, these users. This real-time text will allow people to replace TTY contact and, of course, meet the burdens under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And we'll see more calls migrate to that flavor of technology in the Kansas PSAPs, who are poised to take those kinds of calls. Mind you, this is a hosted solution, enabled and supported RTT will be allowed within certain providers who can use, excuse me, interpreter seeking clarification. who uses 8.2 that is enabled within the RTT network for the PSAPs. And certainly that will allow for training with call taker staff to know how to use that. Of course, as texting becomes more prevalent, this is on the part of the carriers who need to enable those calls and allow that to happen. So the 4 methodologies to connect to a PSAP via video and the other ones described earlier in RTT usage carries a mandate, carries an understanding of the need to train people on how to take these kinds of calls. So call taking procedures need to be expanded apart from the old TTY etiquette of having the conversation go back and forth and having those turn-taking markers like GA and SK. At this stage, we know that PSAPs will have to understand not so much the historical posture of using a TTY and that kind of equipment, but they need to identify perhaps with, sorry?
Excuse me, I'm going to, I think there's a little bit of confusion with the committee. Could you hold on for a second?
Sure.
Representative Probst.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm a little confused, and I don't want to be abrasive and throw a wrench in everything, but also I do. Who am I getting this audit from? This is not an LPA audit, right?
So.
Okay, so this is a consulting company providing us information about the implementation of a, okay, so it just feels unusual to me.
Would you mind addressing that? And also, how was the contract company?
Sure thing. This is the statutorily required 911 audit. Historically, my office has contracted this out because of the technology and the expertise in this area. This is the contractor who is delivering the results of the audit. This was a IFB that went out last spring. We worked through the contract audit committee of this committee, which is a 3-member committee plus the Secretary of Administration, myself, to go through the bids and select a vendor. Here he is delivering the results of the audit.
Representative Probst, I think I understand your concern, and I also agree with it. Will you be giving this audit to another committee besides legislative post-audit? So I'm going to make that request. I can't, I guess I need the chairmans to do it, but I would suggest this needs a deeper dive other than just post-audit. We've had a lot of information. It seems like we're getting more of a technology update, not necessarily an audit of the system, how it's currently working, financials, that type. So I don't know if the committee agrees. Maybe we bring you back at a later date, but I don't know that this is the direction that we were expecting in the audit. Representative Probst.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I mean, to be frank, a lot of what I'm hearing is what I heard when we made a decision to authorize the fee to implement this system. What I want to know at this point is where are we on implementation, and how's it going, and how's it made life better for Kansans, and what do we still have to do? And I don't need, that's a 200-page document. I want brevity, and I want to get right to what we're dealing with here. And this feels like a pitch and not telling me what we're actually dealing with.
Chris, I can do that if you want.
Maybe just hit the highlights of the 3 statutory questions and their brief answers.
And if we may, Chris, I think we reschedule him to come back at a later time. Yeah. Committee, would you like to continue today? Or, I mean, we can get the highlights really quickly and then we can have them come back. Thank you. So please, the highlights.
Yes, the highlights. Status of the system is fully implemented across the non-MARC counties that have selected the system. They're all connected. As far as appropriate use of the fees, we have reviewed the expenditure review committee work of the council. They've done terrific work. They have continuously improved processes. We found that, in fact, the fee money is being appropriately used. With regard to the adequacy of funding, there are two perspectives. One perspective is from the standpoint of the council. The other perspective is from the standpoint of the PSAPs. The funding is adequate for the council to continue the deployment, upgrade, and maintenance of the platform. There are a number of technology upgrades coming up over the next 5 years, and the council does have adequate funding to accomplish those. These are new features, new capabilities, not yet fully developed in all instances, so there is no list price manufacturer pricing to deal with in making that assessment, but the staff is plugged into the community and they are able to plan for that implementation. On the PSAP side, what we heard from all the PSAPs around the state is that from their perspective, funding is not adequate. In the 2018 audit, 24% of the average PSAP's money came from the fee. Now it's down to 16%, and in the meanwhile, prices and costs have continually increased. So these smaller PSAPs particularly are putting off needed expenditures, and because general fund financing from the local government just is not there. So we heard a very strong message with regard to the adequacy of funding from the standpoint of the PSAPs, and we concluded that it is not adequate. The council suggested considering increasing the minimum payment from $60,000 a county to $80,000 a county. Makes sense. There is also an effort underway for consolidation of PSAPs. The platform easily allows technologically a 911 call to be handled anywhere. And so adjacent counties, adjacent cities, from a technology standpoint, can consolidate. Some counties have consolidated. There's an example, City of Oakley, Logan County, Gove County have consolidated. Ford and Edwards County have contracts for call handling for Edwards. That effort is kind of stalled out right now because there's uncertainty about, under the statute, how the funding would flow if you consolidate. Does each consolidating entity still get the same money, or does consolidation reduce it? And I know the council is considering coming in with a legislative proposal on that. There's a big issue that's related to the inadequacy of funding, and that's staffing. Many of these PSAP telecommunicators are classified as administrative call takers, minimum wage, and you can't get somebody that's going to commit to mandatory overtime and endure what in many cases is the worst day in somebody's life for that money. So they're doing wage studies. There are approaches. There's some consideration to a pilot of a work from home scenario. That's not simple. There's a lot of technology and security to overcome, but that's a potential thing to consider. Also, the consolidation would help. Any questions?
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Senator Peterson, then Senator Thompson.
You touched on my first question on the Kansas hosted call handling system and the consolidation and a low and go. Those people are really excited about that.
Yes.
I'm glad to see the council is going to be bringing forward something to us to help clarify their concerns on that part.
I think.
Go ahead. More technology related. The second question, and that is we go to text for some of our people who have challenges communicating?
Yes.
Mike, could you, Senator Peterson?
Sorry about that. My second question is we reach these people that have challenges in communicating. How is VPNs going to affect their location of their the automatic location services on next generation 911. Do you,
I'm not entirely sure of the technology. Do you have a thought on that, Pat?
So the whole premise behind transferring over to NG 911 is to have it be IP-based. So whether you're using a texting device, a wireless device, a video device, you'll be able to access that 911 center with the GIS information alerting them on where that call is coming from.
okay, I was concerned about the people that might be using a VPN, if they're using it off their iPad or whatever, trying to detect, back in 2013, 2014, when Virginia State happened, there's all sorts of people, young people trying to text 911, and, their calls were, the texts were going out there, but then nothing was coming back. And I mean, I remember that very succinctly from when we implemented it. I was just concerned that our people with challenges, we make sure the GIS information is included.
Yeah, to my understanding, that issue has been resolved or is being resolved clearly. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Senator. That's a good question because I know there's individuals that use systems that change your IP address. Yes. And so it's not an accurate depiction of Senator Thompson.
I'll try to make this brief. I've got a ton of questions, actually, so I think it would be good for them to come back. But sometimes you have new technology, you throw the baby out with the bathwater. The old hardline phone lines, landline, never lost power. If the power was out, you could make a 911 call. What do we do when a tornado hits, wipes out a bunch of cell towers, the power's out over a community or a big chunk of a county? What do these people, what kind of a backup is there? Because the new technology, no power, you're done.
Yeah.
Just a quick question.
Yeah, there are at least 3 levels of redundancy in the system. One is the telephone line connection, the other is wireless, and then the third is commercial internet. Now, I think there probably are situations where all of those might be down at once, and what the council has planned, and it's just waiting on supply chain issues, is an emergency mobile deployment center, basically PSAP in a truck that would get out there, have its own power generation and so on, be able to take the calls.
So during an interim, say you did have a major disaster.
Yes.
You are going to have periods where you just can't get through. People are not going to be able to get through. And say a number of cell towers, because those cell towers are all 5G, I believe. So it's a very short signal. It's not something where, you wipe out 2 or 3 or 4 cell towers, you're not going to have an answer.
Yeah, 5G has 3 different bands. Some are longer than others, but you're right. If a cell tower goes down, whatever's on it goes down too.
And I have a bunch of questions about 988, since it sounds like it's a parallel and completely different deal. But with the cost you're talking about, I suspect that we've underestimated the cost of all of this.
988 is separately funded. The $15 billion from the congressional action, the spectrum auction, would be for NG 911 nationwide. And the concept, as I understand it, is it would reach the states proportionally. It'd be a fair bit of money for Kansas.
That's my concern, Madam Chair, and would just like to delve into that at a later time when we have time to really think about it.
Thank you, Senator Thompson. I think we will ask the chairman to reschedule and to have you come back. One of the things that I have mentioned in the past, and I will bring it up again, on our call centers, they are part of the first responder system.
Absolutely.
So the benefits that we do provide for first responders, I think that we should look at that for our call center individuals also. That could help that situation. Committee, any other questions or comments? Seeing none, we will have you return at a later date.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'd be glad to come back.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative. Next on the schedule is Andy. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Would it be helpful if I did this relatively quickly?
At your own pace.
Okay.
But I think the committee would appreciate quickly.
Okay. I will not give you like the Cliffs Notes version exactly, but I also won't take a full 15, hopefully. Okay. So the question that we answered with this audit is pretty straightforward. You can see it on page 2 of the audit report. And it is simply, do agencies provide accurate and reasonable estimates in fiscal notes for potential legislation? So let's flip to page 4 where you'll see the bottom line answer to the question at the top, which is that changes made to bills after the fiscal notes were submitted resulted in most of the inaccuracies that we saw, but a few fiscal notes were unreasonable because of agencies' methods. Now, before we get into the details of that, there is some background information that's outlined on pages 4, 5, 6, and 7. I won't belabor that because you all know what fiscal notes are and generally the purpose that they serve. There's a couple of details I will mention, though, because they're important to later in the story when I'm talking about the findings. So the first is that agencies, so the division of the budget is tasked with creating fiscal notes, but they get the information that they need from agencies because they're the experts, they're the closest to the programs that are being affected by the bills, so they know more precisely what will happen. The division of the budget uses that information to create fiscal notes, the fiscal notes that you all see in their final form. And they do a high-level reasonableness check when they get that information, but they are processing so many fiscal notes in any given session, it's roughly 600 each session, that they don't have the staff to do anything more than that high-level reasonableness check. Let's flip to page 6. Pages 6 and 7 contain an important point, which is that statute requires fiscal notes for original bills. It does not require them to be updated or replaced when bills are amended. Even if the amended bill is totally different from the original bill, there is no new fiscal note. Okay. Bottom of page 7. In order to evaluate whether agencies provide accurate and reasonable estimates in fiscal notes for potential legislation, we did 2 sort of main bodies of work. You can see these at the bottom of page 7. The first one was looking at 10 enacted bills from the 2018 and 2019 legislative sessions. So here we were evaluating whether the estimates contained in the fiscal notes matched with a reasonable margin of error to the actual effects of these fiscal notes. So these all passed, so we could see after a few years whether the estimates and the actuals match. So that was that body of work. The other body of work to determine reasonableness, we selected 10 bills that died. And this is from the 2021-22 sessions, so a little bit more recent, to evaluate the processes that agencies used to create those fiscal notes and whether we thought they came up with reasonable estimates for those fiscal notes. So these are fairly small selections. We think they provide a pretty good cross-section of bills and agencies, and we think they give a pretty good window into why sometimes fiscal notes don't match a bill's actual effects. But of course, all fiscal notes are unique, all bills are unique, so that's the caveat I want to put on all of this.
So Andy, most of us had this in advance. Do you mind going to the conclusion and summary?
Sure, like skip all the way to the end to the conclusion?
Pretty much.
Okay,
The committee has time to ask questions.
you got it.
Thank you.
Okay, the bottom line takeaway from this is that for those 10 that we reviewed, the accuracy of, in other words, estimate versus actual, 3 were accurate, 4 were inaccurate because the bill changed via an amendment, and then the other 3 varied for a variety of different reasons, all of which were probably unforeseeable from the agency's perspective, at least largely. For the 10 where we were evaluating the reasonableness of the processes they used, 7 were reasonable. We thought they had reasonable estimates. In 2 cases, the agency used unvalidated data, poor assumptions. We didn't think they produced reasonable estimates for those. And then for 1, budget made a mistake and left out a pretty large potential expense to the state. So this is similar to what we found in 2010, actually. And if you'll flip with me all the way to the end, to the conclusion, you'll see that, again, pretty similar to what we found in 2010. A lot of what's happening is bills are being passed that were amended after the fiscal note was created, or things are happening like unpredictable participation that agencies can't reasonably foresee. Some of this could be addressed, probably, if bills that are amended would get new fiscal notes or updated fiscal notes. But even then, there's always going to be some differences because the future is inherently unknowable. We didn't make any recommendations for this audit. And with that extremely short version of the report, I will stand for questions.
Thank you, Andy.
Welcome.
Much appreciated. Committee, any questions? Senator Thompson.
I know there are no recommendations, but you look at this and 7 out of 10 are inaccurate. And a lot of times we will make decisions on the floor whether or not a bill survives or not based on that fiscal note. And if it's off significantly, you know, we take this last audit that we just said, we're talking about 911, you're talking about millions and millions of dollars. If you're off significantly, then how can we make good decisions? I guess I would like to have some recommendations from the agency about, you know, what do we do? Is there a way you can pare down what you do to get a more accurate results? Maybe not from this agent, but from our Department of Budget that gives us a better idea, because I know that that's a big problem for us individuals when we look at bills. Just a thought on that.
So Andy, if we may, Representative Probst. Well, my suggestion was going to be that we look at other states. If you would take the time to go back and look at the review and possibly look at other states on how to do it. But Representative Probst, you may have something.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One thing, to that point, I think one thing, I have to get a plug to LPA's podcast, which is great for someone who has to drive 2.5 hours to get here. So I listened to this on the way up, and one thing that maybe you didn't have time to cover is one of yes, the fiscal notes are inaccurate, but I think it's important to look at why. And one of the reasons cited as why is we have a 7-day turnaround on these, and then sometimes as little as 48. We all know how we do things on the floor of our bodies, and they're not clean. And we're asking staff to do almost the impossible and create a recommendation because we've decided that we're going to ram this bill through in a certain amount of time. I think I'm saying the legislature has to own its part of it. And we sometimes do rushed work, and we want it now. And we're making those decisions. We're going to get it done whether we have accurate information or not. And that can't be placed on the agency. That's on our process that we're unwilling to improve.
Representative Francis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I remember from reading through the audit, the primary reason, the largest reason that they were inaccurate was because of amendments that were made in the process. So for instance, if we want to address the workforce issues that it would include, I mean, we could make a requirement that the fiscal note be reviewed by audit after it passed out of each committee. For an example, again, I don't know the workforce issues. You know, there's generally time from when it passes one committee until it goes to the next step.
I think Representative Francis, you're asking for updates, not necessarily post-audit to do those updates, but the administration to update the budget process.
Right. It would be the division of budget that would have to do that in the agencies. But again, that'll create workforce issues also, but.
Right, and I think that comes back to Representative Probst and Senator Thompson's. We do have to address the process. That appears to be what's broken. Chris?
You mentioned other states. We did look at other states in this, so I would ask Andy to give a quick summary of what we learned from other states' processes.
Absolutely.
Okay, so this is on, we do have some on page 11, and I think is the most apropos to the current discussion. So based on a 2015 survey that we reviewed, which was the most recent available information that we had, 26 states update fiscal notes in response to bill amendments. So we talked to a couple, Nebraska and North Dakota, who do this to ask sort of how they accomplish that. They use a variety of different mechanisms. One of the mechanisms that they use to sort of make time and make it possible for them to do this is updating fiscal notes only when amendments pass to the next stage of debate, which reduces the number that they would have to produce fiscal note updates for. There's a couple of other details there, but it is possible. Some other states do require updates in a response to amendments.
Thank you. I think that we should look at that, and we should also look at the website so that those updates travel with the version also. Yeah, thank you. Any other comments or questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you, Andy. We will have you in some of the committees. I can speak for one of the committees that I chair. We'll probably take a look at this.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Committee, next on the agenda is Josh. New economic incentives.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. I am here to talk to you about the memo with the subject line, Evaluating New Economic Development Incentive Programs Created in 2022. State law requires us to evaluate all new EcoDevo programs the year after they're created. This is the second year we've done this, and this memo is intended to satisfy that requirement. But as was the case last year, because these programs are fairly new, there was not a whole lot for us to evaluate for most of them. So rather than describe each of these programs to you, I'm going to focus on some issues we identified that we thought you all might want to further consider and maybe take some action on. Those 4 items are on pages 12 and 13 if you want to flip there, and I will supply additional detail about each program as it's relevant. So the first item at the bottom of page 12 deals with the APEX program. As a reminder, the APEX program is administered by Commerce, and they can use it to give various incentives to businesses that agree to invest at least $1 billion in a facility in Kansas. As of the time we were doing this work, Commerce had agreements with 2 different businesses, Panasonic and Integra, but only the Panasonic project has really gotten underway, and the only incentive they're currently leveraging is their sales tax exemption. And that's going to bring me to this issue for further consideration. At the time we were doing this work, neither Commerce nor Revenue had a way to track how much sales taxes Panasonic had been exempted from. We think some agency needs a way to track this. Commerce officials told us they were working on such a system, but we do think it's important that somebody, Commerce or Revenue, have a way to track that so agencies like Commerce and LPA can tell you all how much in incentives these businesses have gotten, but also in the event that the state should need to claw back benefits from a business, it would know how much to claw back, especially with sales tax, where that's a little trickier to track than other things. The second item deals with the sports fund. The sports fund is also administered by Commerce. It gets some gambling proceeds, and Commerce is supposed to use this fund, generally speaking, for the benefit of professional sports teams. As of the time we were doing the work, I think it was about September, there was about $4 million in that fund, and Commerce was in negotiations about several possible ways in which it might use that money. However, we found the language in statute about how the fund is supposed to receive and then dispense money to be a little confusing. Statute basically says that funding should go into the sports fund annually, and then it also says Commerce at the end of each month needs to report on whether it has excess funding, and if it does have excess funding, it should return that money to the lottery fund, I believe. But it's not really clear what excess funding means in this context. You know, a very strict interpretation could mean Commerce has from July until August to figure out how to use the money, or they have to send it back. A looser interpretation, though, could involve Commerce holding on to that money indefinitely. Right now, they told us they were holding on to it pending the resolution of those negotiations I mentioned. But we thought you all might want to know about that and then consider clarifying how long Commerce should be able to hold money in that fund. The third item deals with the Kansas Affordable Housing Tax Credit. As far as tax credits go, this one's a little more confusing than the average tax credit, in my opinion. The bottom line here is this is a state tax credit that is meant to match the federal low-income housing tax credit, or LIHTC. If the Kansas Housing Resources Corporation, which administers both programs, if it awards federal LIHTC credits to a housing development project, it's also supposed to award a matching amount of state credits. Unlike your sort of typical credit, though, the award amount that KHRC gives a project in 1 year can be claimed each year for 10 years once the project is complete and occupied by renters. So if in 1 year KHRC gives a project $1 million in credits, then that project can basically sell $1 million in credits every year for 10 years to investors. So the cost of that isn't just $1 million, it's $10 million over 10 years in foregone revenues. So with that in mind, the thing we wanted to identify in association with this credit is there is no cap in state law on the amount of state tax credits that can get awarded. The cap is essentially whatever the federal government limits the state to, and as such, we think the potential fiscal impact of this credit could be substantial. This past year, KHRC allocated about $25 million in credits. So over the next 10 years, that could be as much as $250 million in foregone revenues. KHRC will allocate these credits each year, and each year they do this, they create a 10-year stream of credits, such that in the long run, the cost of this program could be as high as something like $250 million a year in foregone revenue. Granted, that's assuming that all of these credits do get allocated and claimed, and I can't see the future, so I can't say that's going to happen, but there does appear to us to be some sort of financial risk here we thought you all might want to look into. We did notice that other states sometimes cap the amount of state tax credits that get handed out. So for example, Oklahoma, they place a $4 million annual cap on their tax credit. The final item I've got for you all deals with the commercial restoration and preservation tax credit. This is a tax credit for taxpayers who restore or preserve quote-unquote commercial structures or install fire prevention equipment. The issue here is that the term commercial structure isn't defined in statute, so KDOR has to use its discretion in deciding what sorts of buildings and projects are eligible for this credit. We thought you all might want to consider clarifying what constitutes a commercial structure in the context of this tax credit. You know, for example, does a commercial structure include things like rental properties that are income producing, or is it like retail businesses only or something else entirely? With that, I'd be happy to stand for questions or discuss any of the other programs that I kind of just skipped over.
Thank you, Andy. Committee, any questions? Senator Corson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm not on the Commerce Committee, but kind of more of a comment than a question. It seems like I understand that the rationale behind wanting to evaluate these programs the year after they're implemented, and I really support the underlying rationale very much. But this is kind of the second straight year where LPA has reported that there's just not much for us to evaluate. So, I mean, I would really kind of be in favor of amending the statute to make it maybe 3 years after they're implemented, just so we have a larger body of things to actually look at, and we can get more meat on whether or not these programs are working the way that they intended. That's just kind of my comment, kind of having been on this now for the second year that we've kind of gotten a similar report from you all. So thank you.
Thank you. Chris.
Thank you, Senator. Just a reminder to the committee, this is part of the entire economic development statute is part of the bill that this committee is pushing forward, and it would eliminate this review altogether.
Thank you, Chris. Committee also, the interim tax committee had discussion over this. Most of these are tax credits, tax incentives that did not come through the tax committee. And so some of these questions, I think, probably would have been addressed if they would have come through tax committees. But that's here nor there. Just something to keep in mind as we move forward. Any other questions or comments, committee? Seeing none. Thank you, Andy. Very good report. Or Josh, I'm sorry. I'm catching up, sorry. Thank you, Josh. So we are to the consent calendar, finally. Sorry, I was trying to rush us there.
Sure, thank you, committee and vice chair. Okay, so there are 3 items on our consent calendar today. So if you want to look at tab F, that's where I am. Attachment A includes the first item on the consent calendar, which is approval of the minutes from your last meeting, which was October 10th. The second item on the consent calendar is acceptance of the performance audits that were presented today. So that would include both the audit presented by the contractor, which was the audit of the Kansas 911 system, And the second one is the fiscal notes audit. And then the third item on the consent calendar is one that you all don't see often, but it is something that we do annually. State law requires us to designate at least 4 performance audits that we've already completed this past calendar year as meeting KGOL requirements, which is the Governmental Operations Accountability System law. So we, as your staff, went through, we are proposing that the 4 audits that meet KGOL are the ones that are listed there in the memo that you see. So that would include 2 economic development incentive audits, one of the Department of Commerce's major economic development incentive programs and the Rural Opportunity Zones program. A third one would be the Groundwater Management District's audit. And the fourth one would be the child support payments and whether they're effective and timely. So as a reminder, the way that the consent calendar works is that unless there is objection from the committee, those items are considered approved. Anyone is welcome to abstain from the minutes if that's necessary.
So Chris, I'm not sure that we want to accept the 911 audit at this time. Okay, committee, so is there any comments or objections on these minutes? Or on the motion?
If that is a motion to not accept, to accept everything except for the 911 audit, I would second that motion. If that's what you're.
Will you be the maker of the motion?
I will be the maker of the motion that we accept the consent calendar items except for the audit of the Kansas 911 system.
Okay, it's been moved by Senator Thompson, seconded by Representative Sawyer. Discussion on the motion, Chris.
Thank you, Senator. I just wanted to clarify to the committee, I understand that you want Mr. Brevitz to come back to the committee and present, be available for more complete discussion. The accepting of the audit is that the work is done, basically.
Right, and I think at this point that we need to take a deeper dive and make sure that some of the concerns addressed by the committee members are, in fact, we felt like we were getting more information about technical detail than necessarily how the audit was performed. And I felt words like, I feel like there wasn't enough funding. That word feel for an audit doesn't, it doesn't mesh for me. But it's up to the committee's wishes. If you would like to withdraw the motion, that's fine. It's whatever you guys think.
I'm not necessarily, I don't think I'd let the motion stand and let the committee decide.
Committee, it's up to you. I'm just throwing it out there as concern, but I'll accept it either way. We can review it. Yes, they did check the box. The report was submitted. Was it the level of detail that the committee and the legislature is looking for?
So I guess notwithstanding, if we withdrew the motion, we can still have them back, but have a deeper dive.
We can.
Okay, well then I withdraw the motion.
Okay, with the second withdraw, okay. Representative Sawyer, I agree with you. So we want to make sure that they return. So if it means pulling them out, but I think you guys are willing to come back. Okay, thank you. Okay, so the motion is the consent calendar, so you don't need anything. Is there any objection on the consent calendar? Seeing none, motion approved. So the next item on the agenda is the schedule. Thank you, Chris.
The last item on the agenda, we are to tab G, and this is just giving you a preview of a very high-level view of the schedule of what's coming down the pike. Just a reminder to the committee must meet within 15 days of the start of the session. I believe the session starts January 8th, so that means we have to meet by the 23rd. Normally in the session, the committee meets on Wednesdays at noon. So we'll probably, unless there's objection, we'll probably look at scheduling those going forward. In tab G, that sheet shows kind of what's coming down the pike. I don't know that we'll need a meeting every Wednesday. I'm sure we won't. But roughly, audits that are wrapping up now and would be ready in late January include community college athletics, Capers 3, and the second half of IT security. Again, the committee must meet within the first 15 days. Also, at that first meeting, very important, the committee itself elects new leadership. It's an even-numbered year, 2024, so that means the chair of the committee would switch to the Senate. And then by the end of the month of January, by statute, we have to have a Department of Commerce come make a presentation. Otherwise, after that, February is looks like we'll have angel investor tax credit ready, and the one on DEI spending and foreign contributions at universities. March currently is motor vehicle taxes, should be due around then. And then the rest at the bottom are ones that have been approved but not yet started, with the addition of the two that you approved today. Any questions? So I will work with Representative Tarwater to schedule that first meeting in January, because he is still currently the chair, but at that meeting, the chair will change. And then we'll, if the committee is amenable, Wednesdays at noon, sort of plan on that for 1 hour short meetings. We'll just do maybe one audit, maybe two, and just meet more frequently during the session.
So it looks like, Chris, January could be a full month then with 3 audits.
If you do them right, I mean, we can present them whenever. I'm just showing you when they'll be ready-ish.
Okay.
Yeah.
Committee, any questions on the schedule or comments? Seeing none, I think we're good.
And one 10-second item, congratulations to Nicole. She is celebrating her 10-year anniversary with Legislative Post Audit.
Congratulations. Well, thank you, Nicole, for all your work, and you're one we depend on, so thank you very much. You guys, again, thank you to the Legislative Post Audit team. We're very lucky to have you guys, and thank you to the committee for your patience. We missed 4:45 by 1 minute. I apologize. We're adjourned. Thank you.